Why did the room go quiet the moment she walked in? No one knew exactly, not at first. They only felt it, the small shift in the air, the kind you notice without understanding, like the pressure drop before a storm. She didn't look dangerous. She didn't even look remarkable. Just a woman in a faded uniform, hair tied back in a plain ponytail, moving with the kind of ease that made her seem almost invisible. But maybe that was the first clue. Truly dangerous people rarely announce themselves. She slipped into the booth by the window of the diner, the officers' club, though everyone knew the name was a joke, and ordered a steak with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need anything else from the world. No chatter, no presence, just stillness. Some people wear their stories loudly. Hers lived in silence. But quiet always threatens the insecure. Across the room, a man in an expensive suit, the kind that belonged more to glossy offices than dusty bases, leaned back in his booth, swirling a glass of wine like he was on a yacht rather than a roadside diner. His voice had already been carrying, full of self-importance, but now it got louder, sharper, aimed like a weapon. "Look at the state of that," he said, nodding toward her without even lowering his voice. "Scars like that, honestly, you'd think they'd have some standards for who gets to wear the uniform." A few uncomfortable laughs trickled from his table. People laugh when they're afraid to confront cruelty, when they hope the target won't hear. But she heard. Of course she heard. His voice cut through every conversation like a blade. She didn't turn, didn't react, not even a twitch. She just cut her steak with that calm, slow precision, knife gliding, fork steady. The motion was so controlled it almost didn't look like movement at all. A surgeon's discipline, a soldier's restraint, a ghost's quiet. At the corner table, 4 Army Rangers watched with a stillness that felt heavier than anger. Their eyes tracked the way she held her fork, not like silverware but like a tool, thumb braced, knuckles aligned, wrist relaxed. A habit you don't learn in kitchens, a grip from battlefields. One of them, a grizzled sergeant first class, narrowed his eyes. The room seemed to shrink around the thought passing silently among the men. "She's one of us," or something even rarer. That stillness wasn't fear nor submission. It was coiled power, the kind you only earn the hard way. The contractor kept going, his voice sliding across the room like oil spilling across water. "If you're selling strength, you have to look strong," he said, gesturing toward her scars. "You can't have people representing you who look broken." He said broken like it was a punchline, like her body was a resume he had the right to grade. She placed her fork down, parallel to the knife, perfect, measured, every movement designed, not performed. The Rangers exchanged another glance. They had seen men freeze before detonations, freeze before firefights, freeze before breaking. But this stillness was different. This was restraint. She could have ended him with a few syllables, but she chose silence, a far more devastating language. But silence has its own weight, and the diner began to feel it. The man kept talking, mistaking quiet for weakness. "It's unprofessional," he continued. "Makes the whole establishment look damaged, not exactly the image we want for our partners." His words slithered through the air, filling the cracks between discomfort and cowardice. She didn't look at him. Didn't need to. You don't engage with something beneath your operational threshold. She was not in that room with him. She was somewhere else, inside a mission mindset, a discipline carved by years of chaos. The Rangers recognized it instantly. That was battlefield focus. And then the world outside intervened. Before anyone noticed her shift, her head turned slightly, barely an angle, just enough to indicate she sensed something the rest missed. A tremor through the glass window, a vibration in the air, a calculation happening silently inside her. Then every head snapped toward the highway. A semi-truck fishtailed across the asphalt, tires screaming, horn blaring in a desperate howl. A sedan veered into its lane, metal buckled. The trailer jackknifed, slamming sideways into traffic. A minivan lifted off the pavement and spun like a toy. The sound that followed wasn't a crash, It was an explosion made of steel and terror. The entire diner froze. People screamed, plates shattered. The contractor's voice died mid-sentence, swallowed by the roar outside. But the woman didn't freeze. The instant the sound hit, she was already rising from her booth, movements brilliant in their efficiency. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Her focus snapped into a sharper, deadlier clarity. She assessed the scene in a single inhale. "First aid kit," she commanded, voice steady, slicing through the panic like a scalpel. The bartender jolted into motion. "You call 911, multi-vehicle collision, heavy rescue." A man obeyed before he realized. He'd responded to her like a commanding officer. "Everyone else stay inside, away from the windows." Her voice held the force of someone who had given thousands of orders under fire. And then she was gone, moving through the diner, through chaos, through fear, slipping into the wreckage outside with the calm of someone entering familiar terrain. The Rangers rose instantly. But not to lead. To follow. They grabbed towels, belts, ice buckets, anything useful. No one told them to. They didn't need to be told. They had recognized the real commander the moment the danger began. Through the window, she moved like a figure out of another world, part medic, part warrior, part guardian. She bypassed screaming civilians and dramatic wounds. She went for the quietest victims first, the ones not crying, the ones fatting. The minivan was crushed, a woman slumped over the wheel, a child's seat in the back. Her mind made the calculations faster than fear could form. "Towel," she called. It flew into her hand from behind. SFC Cole supplying exactly what she needed, exactly when she needed it. She shattered glass with a single, efficient strike, cleared the window, reached the driver, felt the pulse, faint, shallow, dying. She demanded a knife and a pen. They appeared instantly. She decompressed a tension pneumothorax with the hollow barrel of a ballpoint pen, her hands steady, her voice soft, her commands crisp. The contractor watched from the doorway, paralyzed. The woman he mocked for looking broken was quite literally pulling life back from the cliff. And for the first time, he understood something he had never considered. Her scars weren't signs of damage. They were proof she'd survived places he couldn't imagine. Proof she had saved people he would never meet. Proof that competence is quiet, and quiet is terrifying when you finally notice it. As she worked on the child next, her voice gentle, her touch steady, the first ambulance screamed toward the scene, but it arrived late. Not because it responded slowly, because she had already taken command. And in that moment, in the flashing lights and twisted metal, the truth became undeniable even to those who had never known it. Some heroes don't announce themselves. Some storms move with silence. And sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who never raises her voice. What made the paramedics stop in their tracks the moment they arrived? Maybe it was the order carved into chaos. Maybe the way 4 stone-faced rangers stood like sentinels around the wreckage, forming a protective perimeter with the same calm they'd bring to a hot landing zone. Or maybe it was her, the scarred woman kneeling beside a small boy, hands steady, voice soft, eyes scanning the disaster like she'd memorized the battlefield at a glance. Whatever it was, the moment the first paramedic stepped out of the ambulance, he froze. He wasn't looking at a civilian bystander. He wasn't looking at some off-duty soldier lending a hand. He was looking at someone who had already rewritten the rules of the scene. "What have we got?" he asked, not with authority but with respect. She didn't look up, didn't pause. She spoke in crisp, fast, perfect medical fragments, the way someone does when instinct has taken over a long time ago. Female driver, mid-30s. Tension pneumothorax decompressed with an improvised tool. Vitals stabilizing. Unconscious, possible TBI. Child, boy, 5, thready pulse, significant scalp laceration, possible early shock. 2 other victims, walking wounded. Her words landed like clean surgical cuts. No filler, no hesitation, just truth. The paramedic nodded like a junior officer receiving orders. His team moved without further questions. Behind her, the Rangers mirrored her rhythm. Their silence wasn't passive, it was a language, a vow. They weren't leading this scene, they were following her. And the contractor, the man who had mocked her scars moments earlier, stood motionless, face pale, shaken down to his bones. He felt something he hadn't tasted in years. Humility. A weight pressing into him, anchored by the realization that he had never in his life been as useful as she was in the last 11 minutes. When the fire captain arrived, she briefed him with the same clean precision. Then she stepped back, not to rest but to observe, eyes scanning the scene for anything missed, her body still in that coiled, ready state. The Rangers subtly shifted near her, instinctively protecting her flank like she was one of their own. That's when the black Suburban rolled up, silent, steady, unmistakably official. A brigadier general stepped out. Every soldier nearby stiffened on instinct, but the general wasn't scanning for rank. He wasn't looking for salutes. He was searching for her. His eyes locked on her the instant he saw her wiping blood from her hands with a gauze pad. Something softened in his expression, a recognition so deep it reached beyond rank, beyond memory, into something older. Respect. Real, unfiltered respect. He walked straight toward her, ignoring everyone else. The Rangers snapped to attention so sharply that even the fire crews took notice. She didn't stand taller. She didn't shift. She simply acknowledged his approach with a small tilt of the head, her stillness unchanged. "Ma'am," he said quietly. The word hit the scene like a thunderclap. Generals don't call enlisted medics ma'am. They don't lower their tone. They don't soften. Not unless they're speaking to someone who has earned respect in places where rank means nothing and survival means everything. "I thought that was you," he said. "They told me you were rotating through this sector." She nodded, "Sir." The general let out a controlled breath, memories drifting through his eyes. "Last time I saw you, you were in Helmand, sandstorm tearing the pave hawk apart. You were working on 3 of my guys at once." He paused. "You kept all 3 alive." A flicker of something pain maybe crossed her eyes, and then vanished. "Is the situation here under control?" he asked. "Yes, sir." He stepped back and rendered a slow, deliberate salute. A 1-star general saluting a scarred specialist. It shifted reality, it bent hierarchy, it froze time. She returned the salute with the same calm precision she applied to everything else. A ceremony between 2 warriors, not 2 ranks. Then the general turned to the crowd, civilians, soldiers, cops, bystanders, and his voice thundered with the full weight of command. "For those unaware, you have just witnessed a master at her craft. You are in the presence of a legend." A stunned silence fell. He continued, "This individual has the highest number of confirmed lives saved in a combat zone since Vietnam. Her record is mostly classified. The medals she's allowed to wear are a fraction of what she's earned." The contractor's knees went weak. "She is what we call a ghost," the general said. "The one who walks into hell so others can walk out." He didn't say her name. She didn't allow it. She didn't need it. And with that, the spell broke. The emergency crews resumed their work. The Rangers exhaled. Civilians whispered. The general returned to his vehicle, and she faded. Quietly, naturally, like she was never meant to be the focus. She drifted toward the fringe of the scene. The Rangers noticed, but they didn't follow. This was her exit, and they respected her ghost-like way. But the contractor couldn't move. Something inside him cracked, not from fear or embarrassment, but from realization. He had built his life on image. She saved lives with silence. He wanted to speak, wanted to apologize, but his throat locked. How do you apologize for ignorance that deep? For arrogance carved into habit? for misjudging someone whose worst day eclipsed your entire life's worth. By the time he found his voice, she was gone. No goodbye, no last look. Just gone. Like smoke slipping through fingers. He tried to find her. He tried everywhere. Base hospital, nothing. Personnel locator, no record found. Administration, restricted. It was like she didn't exist outside that moment. And maybe that's what unnerved him the most. She didn't need to exist in the spotlight. She didn't need witnesses. Her life had been lived in the quiet corners of war where heroes don't get applauded. They get scars. They get memories that revisit in the dark. She wasn't hiding. She was simply already moving toward the next fire. The next victim. The next life. But something else pulled him, a gravity he didn't understand yet. Guilt, shame, maybe something deeper, a desire to be better than he had been when she saw him. It led him to the Rangers' barracks. He didn't know what he expected. Maybe they'd shout at him, maybe they'd throw him out, maybe they'd break him in a way he probably deserved. Instead, he found SFC Cole in the gym, hammering a heavy bag with an intensity that made the room vibrate. Cole stopped only when he sensed the presence behind him. He turned slowly, wiping sweat from his forehead. No anger, no hate, just a stare sharp enough to cut open a man's excuses. "What do you want?" Cole asked. The contractor swallowed, his voice cracked. I wanted to apologize." Cole watched him, silent. "I was wrong," the contractor said. "I was ignorant. I judged what I didn't understand. There's no excuse." Cole tossed the towel aside, studying him. Then he shook his head slowly. "An apology doesn't fix anything." The contractor blinked. "Then what do I do?" Cole stepped closer, not threatening, just close enough that the man felt the weight of truth in his words. "You want to fix it," Cole said quietly. "Stop talking, start doing." That sentence hit harder than a punch. Respect isn't in words, it's in actions. You want to honor what she is. Go earn it. The contractor felt something shift in him. Maybe for the first time in his life. Cole turned back to the punching bag and delivered a final parting blow. Not to the bag, but to the man who needed it most. "And understand this," he said. "She didn't need your respect, but you needed hers." The man stood there long after Cole resumed his strikes, long after the echo faded. It was the first moment of his new life. The first step in a long road toward redemption. And somewhere far from that base, far from that diner, far from the chaos she just tamed, the scarred woman walked alone into the fading evening, slipping back into the quiet world she belonged to. She didn't know she had changed a life that night. She didn't care. She only cared about the next life she might save. What does a person do after their entire worldview is shattered in one night? Some break under the weight of shame. Some pretend nothing happened, and a rare few choose to rebuild. The contractor, Mark Colton, didn't know which kind of man he was yet, only that something inside him felt unbearably wrong, like a bone that had healed crooked and finally snapped back into place, painfully, violently, but correctly. He didn't sleep that night. The images kept replaying, her calm face in the firelight of wrecked vehicles, the blood on her hands, the child she'd cradled, the woman she'd saved with a pen, the Rangers following her without a word, the general saluting her like a sacred relic. And then the thing that haunted him the most, her perfect silence. He had spent his entire life trying to sound important. She didn't need the world to know her name. The contrast burned him. By morning, he felt like someone had peeled back all the superficial layers he'd built around himself, leaving the raw truth underneath, like exposed nerve endings. He wanted to see her again. But she was already gone. Every office told him the same thing, no record. Every database said, restricted. Every hallway whispered, ghost. So instead, He turned toward the only people she had allowed near her that night. The Rangers. He didn't mean to approach them. He didn't mean to follow the tug that pulled him to the gym. But some part of him, some desperate, broken piece, needed direction, needed punishment, needed purpose. And Cole's words were still echoing in his skull. Stop talking, start doing. That morning he stood in front of his bathroom mirror and stared at his own reflection, a man who wore confidence like cologne but had none in his bones. He took off his expensive suit, folded it, tossed it aside, put on something plain, simple, quiet. He didn't tell anyone what he was feeling, not because he was shy, but because for the first time in his life, he understood that feelings weren't meant to be displayed like trophies. They were meant to fuel change. He arrived at work early, before the lights flickered on, before the building hummed with military and civilian chatter. His job, once prestigious and strategic, had been reduced to a minor logistics assignment after the incident. Before last night, he would have felt insulted. Now he saw it as an opportunity. The warehouse was cavernous, cold, stacked with towers of crates, medical supplies and dusty pallets that held histories no one cared to understand. He walked through it alone, listening to the lonely echo of his steps. This is where he would earn it. Not through speeches, not through apologies, through sweat, through silence, through hours no one would ever praise him for. He grabbed a clipboard and started over. He learned the system, line by line, shipment by shipment, code by code. It didn't matter that he was a senior contractor with an office background. Today he was a worker. He stayed late, later than everyone else. He cleaned, sorted, memorized inventory systems, found errors no one bothered with, fixed them, quietly. And when he went home, exhausted, arms aching, clothes dusty, he realized he felt something strange. Satisfaction. But the transformation was slow. Humbling yourself is rarely cinematic. It isn't heroic. It isn't glamorous. It is work, boring, repetitive, invisible work, and he embraced it. His company didn't know what to do with him. He wasn't complaining about being demoted. He wasn't calling meetings to showcase his improvements. He simply kept arriving early, leaving late, and asking for nothing. Slowly the warehouse staff, civilian workers he'd once talked over, began nodding to him, then talking, then trusting. He didn't try to impress them. He just listened. He learned something important. Logistics wasn't about trucks or crates, it was about people, about soldiers with missing limbs waiting for medical equipment, pilots needing emergency gear before their next mission, field medics, ghosts like her, relying on supplies that didn't have the luxury of errors. Every pallet he sorted felt like a tribute. Every box he labeled felt like an apology written with effort instead of words. Every night he left the warehouse with more sweat than pride. And yet, despite everything he was doing, despite the progress, despite the small nods from warehouse workers, he still felt like he wasn't doing enough to honor her. He didn't know what enough looked like. He only knew he was chasing something he could never repay. Weeks passed. Mark wasn't looking for recognition, but recognition found him anyway. A Pentagon logistics colonel called unexpectedly. "We've been reviewing base supply chain improvements," the colonel said. "Your sector shows a 40% increase in efficiency. Explain." Mark blinked. "It was just work, sir." The colonel paused. "We want to implement your changes across multiple bases." Mark felt something shift inside him, not pride, not ego. Purpose. He ended the call with a simple, "I'm glad it helps the soldiers, sir." Not my system, not my work, not my achievement. Just service. The irony didn't escape him. He had spent years building himself a reputation, and the moment he tried to disappear, the world finally saw him clearly. One evening, after another long day in the warehouse, Mark stepped into the parking lot. The sky was streaked with orange and fatting gold. He saw a figure leaning against his car. SFC Cole. For a moment Mark's heart stopped. He approached cautiously, unsure whether he was about to be judged or measured again. Cole didn't speak at first, just watched him with that same granite stare. Then Cole did something unexpected. He nodded. Slow, deliberate, respectful. It was the smallest gesture in the world. It hit like an award ceremony. For Mark, that nod felt like the first time he had ever been seen for who he was trying to become, not who he had been. "Keep earning it," Cole said finally, voice low. "I will," Mark answered. And he meant it. That became his life. Warehouse, sweat, silence, service, night after night, day after day. He didn't need applause, he didn't need recognition, he didn't need anyone to know. He needed to honor the woman whose scars he had mocked. He needed to honor the ghost medic. But life isn't linear, growth isn't smooth, and transformation always demands more. So Mark went further. He began volunteering at the Wounded Warrior Transition Unit, quietly sweeping floors, hauling supplies, cleaning bathrooms, running errands for soldiers relearning their lives. Soldiers missing limbs, soldiers missing sleep, soldiers missing pieces of themselves that would never grow back. Mark didn't try to give speeches. He didn't try to connect through inspirational words. He sat with them, listened, held space for them. Some talked. Some didn't. Some just needed silence. He understood silence now. He respected silence now. He had learned silence from the only person whose quiet ever felt louder than a shout. And everywhere he went, he heard her name, not out loud but in the stories of those she had touched. "She carried me to the bird," one soldier whispered. "She was the one talking me through the pain," another murmured. "She held my hand until I passed out," someone else said. Each story was a stitch in a tapestry Mark had only seen the edge of that night on the highway. She wasn't just a medic. She was the kind of person who left people better than she found them, the kind who made brokenness feel survivable, the kind who left scars on the world in the shape of healing, not hurt. Mark began to realize the truth. He hadn't just insulted a woman. He had insulted a legacy. And now his entire life, every choice, every action was shaped around honoring that legacy. Not to earn forgiveness, but to deserve the lesson. Months passed. The base changed, people rotated, new faces arrived, old ones left. Life moved as it always does in the military world. But Mark stayed, working, serving, growing. And somewhere out there, unseen but not forgot, the ghost medic kept walking her own path, her own silent war, her own mission. She didn't know a man was rebuilding his life around the lesson. She didn't even know she taught. She didn't know she had changed the trajectory of someone who had once mocked her. She didn't know she had created a quiet ripple of redemption. She didn't need to know. She wasn't saving just lives. She was saving the brokenness in people she didn't even remember. When did the story stop being only hers? Was it the moment the general saluted her on that blood-stained highway? Or the moment the Rangers formed a perimeter around her without a word? Or maybe it was later, whispered in the barracks, carried through the Chow Hall, drifting across training fields like a rumor you couldn't ignore. Stories have a way of growing legs. Hers grew wings. But legends are strange things. They spread faster than truth, yet somehow in her case they never felt exaggerated. If anything, people seemed terrified of diluting the truth with too much awe, as though her story demanded precision, demanded quiet reverence, demanded silence. And because she vanished as smoothly as she appeared, the mystery only deepened with time. People asked, who was she? Where did she go? How could someone like that be real? But only a few ever wondered the more haunting question. What did it cost her to be that way? She didn't know a legend was blooming behind her. Her life wasn't shaped around moments where crowds watched her work. Her life was measured in deployments, in long nights, in dust storms and evacuation calls and blood that didn't belong to her drying under her nails. She didn't stay in one place long enough to hear people whisper. She didn't have the luxury. The quiet professionals she moved alongside lived in the shadows between wars, never still, never home, never done. She wasn't avoiding fame. She was avoiding memory. The night after the highway disaster, she didn't celebrate, didn't sleep well, didn't tell anyone about the general's salute. She didn't tell anyone anything ever. She simply rotated back to her quarters, washed the blood from her hands, and stared at the scar along her forearm, the burn Cole had told the contractor about, the one she'd earned pulling someone else from the fire. Funny how every scar had a clear story, yet none of the stories belonged solely to her. She traced the burn lightly with her fingertip. She could still smell the Humvee's flames, could still hear the screams under the roar, could still feel the weight of her platoon sergeant as she dragged him out, knowing every second might be her last. She wondered, not for the first time, why she survived when so many didn't. She never found a good answer. That night she lay awake long after lights out, staring at the ceiling. The highway scene had awakened something she tried hard to bury, the part of her that still heard cries through walls, still sensed danger before sound, still felt responsible for every life within reach. Sleep didn't come. It never did the night after a save. She rolled out of bed at 400 and kept moving. Stillness was the one thing she couldn't handle. Meanwhile, on the other side of base, Mark Colton's transformation continued its slow, grinding evolution. But part of him, deeply human, painfully curious, still tried to understand who she really was. He wasn't looking for her out of obsession or guilt anymore. He was looking because the world suddenly felt wrong without knowing. He asked around, carefully at first, then with more sincerity. "You ever seen someone like her before?" he asked a warrant officer. "No," the man said, "and I hope to God I never lose someone like her on a mission." He asked a military nurse. "That woman worked on one of my patients years ago," she whispered. "He was supposed to die. He didn't. She stayed with him for 7 hours." He asked a young infantry private. "Oh, the ghost medic," the kid said. "Sir, you know she saved my old squad leader, right? He said she was calm even when the sky was falling." Every retelling solidified the same truth. She saved people not by chance, but because she refused to let them die. Mark didn't know what to do with that kind of power. What do you do when you discover someone who embodies everything you should have been? You try to follow their path, not their footsteps but their principles. He doubled down on his work at the warehouse. He showed up earlier, stayed later. He stopped looking for praise. He stopped trying to be liked. He found a strange peace in anonymity. But there was one thing he didn't expect. His reputation began to change. People began to say things like, "That quiet suit, hard worker. He's changed a lot. Guy doesn't complain anymore, just does his job." He didn't realize how much he'd changed until one evening when he helped a corporal load prosthetic supplies into a van, and the corporal said, "You were there that night, weren't you, when she saved those people?" Mark froze. "Yes," he said softly. The corporal smiled faintly. "Then you saw a real one." Mark swallowed. "Yes, I did." The corporal nodded, then said something that hit him harder than he expected. "Seeing someone like her makes you want to be better, doesn't it?" Mark didn't trust his voice, so he only nodded. But while the story was reshaping Mark, it was also reshaping the base itself in ways he never imagined. The Rangers spoke of her like she was a myth whispered between missions. Their quiet respect spread to the younger enlisted. Officers began referencing her story when talking about humility and leadership. Senior NCOs used the incident as a teaching tool. Look deeper than surface. You never know who's carrying the weight. And slowly, almost without anyone noticing, the culture began to shift. More listening, less arrogance, more patience, less posturing. Mark didn't realize until much later that the lesson Cole drilled into him was spreading far beyond him. Respect is earned in silence. People began to adopt it, not because they knew her, but because they knew of her. The little diner, the Officers Club, had undergone renovations, new booths, new counters, but the owner, a veteran with a scar running down his jaw, quietly placed a small plaque near the register. No fanfare, no announcement. In honor of those who serve in silence. Highway 4 never forget. Every soldier who walked in understood. Because by now, everyone had heard the story. And the more it spread, the more Mark realized something uncomfortable. He wasn't just changing because he wanted redemption from her. He was changing because he wanted to live in a world shaped by people like her. Quiet, competent, steady, selfless. People who didn't need to talk about their worth because their actions carved it into the earth. He wanted to be that kind of person. Not for praise, not for image, but because he'd seen what it looked like. And once you see someone like that, you can never unsee them. Yet somewhere in the midst of all this growth and change and whispered legend, she felt none of it. She continued her rotation. She trained, she studied, she prepared for the next mission, always the next mission. Her life never paused long enough to feel seen. But she did feel something else, something she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge. Loneliness. Not the kind cured by company or conversation, but the kind that comes from being the strong one for too long, the one who holds the broken, the one who takes the fear, the one who absorbs trauma so others can walk away lighter. She stared at her hands sometimes, steady hands that had saved so many lives, and wondered who was going to save her. It wasn't a dramatic thought. It wasn't sorrow. It was simply truth she rarely let breathe. She pressed her thumb into the scar on her palm, grounding herself, remembering, accepting. She didn't want recognition, didn't want applause, didn't want a legend. But she did want something she would never say aloud. She wanted someone to understand what it felt like to carry lives inside your memory, the way others carried names in a phone. She wanted someone who didn't flinch at scars, someone who didn't try to fix her, someone who just recognized her. But she had learned long ago that people like her didn't get that luxury. Her world was built on wounds, on chaos, on work that never ended. She didn't have time to be understood. So she folded the thought neatly, locked it in silence, and moved on. There were always more lives to save, more disasters to walk into, more missions waiting with their jaws open. And somewhere on the base, a man was rebuilding his life piece by piece, not knowing that the person who had altered his trajectory was carrying her own quiet weight. Never knowing that the strongest people are often the loneliest. Never knowing that saving lives comes with a cost no medal can repay. Their paths had crossed once, and fate was not finished with them yet. What happens when a story grows bigger than the person who lived it? It stops being a moment and becomes a mirror, reflecting what people need, what they fear, what they aspire to be. On the base, her legend had become that mirror. Soldiers spoke of her with reverence. Commanders invoked her story as quiet doctrine. Even the young privates, kids who had never seen combat, talked about her like she was a ghost protecting the edges of their world. And yet she had no idea. She was already gone from that sector, transferred again, moving along the invisible routes that only the military's most specialized medics traveled. Her life was a blur of briefings, field exercises, simulations, emergency drills that were never enough, and hours spent alone in dim rooms reviewing casualty reports from places she'd never see again. She lived in motion because motion was easier than memory. But even she couldn't outrun the quiet weight settling in her chest. It wasn't regret. It wasn't fear. It was something far more subtle. Exhaustion. The kind that doesn't come from muscles or bones, but from the soul. She didn't talk about it, didn't acknowledge it. She simply kept going because stopping felt dangerous. Stopping meant remembering. Stopping meant feeling. And she had no space for either. But the body keeps its own secrets. And her stillness, her legendary silence, was beginning to crack at the edges. Back on base, Mark Colton didn't realize he was searching for something too. At first, he assumed it was closure. Then he thought it was redemption. But the deeper he buried himself in work, the more time he spent listening instead of talking, the more he sat with wounded soldiers and absorbed their pain like they were teaching him a new language, the more he understood the truth. He wasn't chasing her. He was chasing the person he wanted to become. And somehow, that person felt closer to who she already was. Late nights in the warehouse became a ritual. The smell of cardboard and diesel, the endless hum of fluorescent lights, the sharp sting of cold metal on his fingertips, those sensations grounded him. They made him feel human in a way expensive suits never could. Sometimes he caught himself replaying the night of the crash, not to indulge guilt, but to remind himself why silence mattered more than presentation, why scars meant survival, not shame, why competence was its own kind of holiness. He thought often about the moment she stepped into the wreckage, how she didn't hesitate, didn't posture, didn't perform. She simply acted, cleanly, efficiently, with unwavering purpose. He wanted to be like that, even if he never saw her again. But fate doesn't ask permission before circling back. It began with a knock on the warehouse door late one evening. Mark almost didn't hear it over the thrum of machinery. When he opened the door, a young MP stood there, breath frosting in the cold. "You Mark Colton." Mark stiffened, old instincts resurfaced, guilt flaring without cause. "Yes." "You've been requested." The MP nodded toward the dim street outside. "By command Sergeant Major Reeves." Mark blinked. Reeves was the highest-ranking enlisted leader on the entire installation, a man known for spine-chilling bluntness and zero tolerance for ego. What does he need me for?" The MP didn't answer. MPs rarely did. Mark followed, nerves prickling. His mind scrambled through every mistake he could have made, but there were none. For once in his life, he wasn't guilty of anything. And that scared him even more. They drove across base in silence, through the skeletal shadows of motor pools, past the faint glow of the hospital, down a road few used at night. They stopped at a low concrete building with no markings. Reeves stood outside. He was a mountain in a uniform, a man carved entirely from hard lessons. When he looked at Mark, it wasn't with disdain or suspicion. It was something far stranger. Approval. "Colton," Reeves said, voice deep, roughened by decades. "Walk with me." Mark walked. Reeves didn't give him space for questions. He just began talking, each word deliberate. "I've been watching you," he said. Mark's breath hitched. "Sir, I—" "Don't interrupt." Mark shut his mouth instantly. "You were arrogant," Reeves said. "Loud, thought the world needed to hear your voice." Mark nodded, ashamed but accepting. "And then one day you stopped talking." Reeves glanced at him. "Started working, quietly, consistently, for the right reasons." Mark swallowed. "I'm just trying to—" "Don't ruin it with words," Reeves said. They walked behind the building, where floodlights cast long shadows on the asphalt. "You know why you're here?" Reeves asked. "No, CSM." Reeves paused, studying him. "Because someone noticed." Mark froze. "Who?" Reeves' answer came like a slow-moving hammer. "The Rangers." Mark felt his heart skip. Why would they? "They don't speak highly of many men," Reeves said. "But they speak of you. They say you're trying, that you're earning it, that you're not wasting the lesson. Mark stared at the ground, overwhelmed. Reeves continued. The ghost medic left this sector, but the impact didn't. The ghost medic, Mark repeated softly, the name settling on his tongue with reverence. Reeves turned to him fully. You want to honor her. Keep going, keep serving, don't ask for recognition, don't expect absolution, just do the work. Mark nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the words change him further. And Colton, Reeves added. Yes, CSM. Reeves' voice dropped. Men like me spend entire careers hopping to serve with someone like her. Don't cheapen that by trying to turn her into a destination. Mark frowned. I don't understand. Reeves sighed. You're not meant to find her. You're meant to follow the direction she pointed you toward. Mark absorbed that, the truth settling deep. It wasn't about her. It was about the standard she embodied. But Reeves wasn't finished. He pulled something from his pocket, a small folded piece of paper, handwritten, smudged. This was left for you. For me, Mark's voice cracked. Reeves nodded, dropped off anonymously at battalion this morning. Mark unfolded it with trembling hands. Inside was a single sentence. Scars are not shame, they're the places where the light got in. No signature. No rank. No name. But he knew. He felt it like a pressure wave. She had heard what happened afterward. She had noticed. She had seen him trying. He closed his eyes, breath trembling, tears burning behind the pressure. A handwritten message from the ghost herself. He didn't deserve it. But she gave it anyway. Reeves placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. Don't lose the momentum now. I won't, Mark whispered. He meant it more than he'd meant anything in his life. As Mark walked back to the warehouse, he felt lighter, not forgiven, not redeemed, but chosen. Not by fate, not by her, but by the path she'd unknowingly set him on. A path paved not with words, but with work. A path where scars were not flaws, but proof of survival. A path where silence was not emptiness, but strength. And somewhere far away, she continued her quiet rotations, unaware she had just given a man the final piece he needed to become someone new. But fate was still moving. Their stories weren't done intersecting. Not yet. Not even close. What does a legacy become when the person who shaped it keeps moving? It becomes a shadow that stretches behind her, touching people she never meets, guiding choices she never sees, changing lives she will never know existed. And while she walked forward, quiet, steady, unassuming, her shadow had grown long enough to reach places she'd never look back towards. But destiny has a strange habit of looping threads together, even when the people involved believe their paths have parted for good. Months passed, seasons shifted. The base she'd left behind changed again. New soldiers rotated in, old ones retired. The warehouse Mark worked in became a model of efficiency, so much so that headquarters asked him to train other bases. He refused the spotlight, choosing instead to keep working silently, almost obsessively, using his hands as if they were mending something deeper than supply chains. He kept her note, folded in his wallet like a private compass. Scars are not shame. They're the places where the light got in. He read it in quiet moments, before work, after hard days. On nights he sat alone in his apartment feeling weight without knowing why. The words grounded him, reminded him that growth wasn't loud, redemption wasn't dramatic, change wasn't a speech, it was a discipline. But part of him wondered if she even remembered writing it. Part of him wondered if she ever thought about that night at all. He suspected she didn't. People like her lived moving forward, not backward. Her world was always calling, another mission, another disaster, another life to save. And yet fate, silent as she was, hadn't forgotten. It began with a mass casualty incident exercise, one of those large-scale base drills meant to simulate chaos, confusion, and triage under pressure. Mark had been assigned to help coordinate supply flow between responder teams, a job well beneath his corporate credentials, but exactly aligned with who he'd become. He was standing beside a table of bandages and airway tubes when he heard a voice behind him, calm, controlled, unmistakable. "Check the placement of those tourniquets, they're too high." He froze. He knew that voice. He turned slowly, breath caught in his throat. There she was. Not in legend, not in memory. In uniform, in motion, alive. She wore the same quiet focus as the day on the highway, the same faded fatigues, the same unreadable expression, the same scars like constellations mapping out a life lived in fire. She didn't notice him at first. She was too busy correcting a young medic's technique with patient firmness. Then she turned, eyes sweeping the area with her habitual precision. Her gaze landed on him. For the first time in their strange, silent story, she paused. Not dramatically, not with shock, just a small, nearly imperceptible shift, like a finely tuned instrument detecting a familiar note. Mark opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Words felt dangerous, too blunt for the gravity of the moment. So he said the only thing that felt right. "Thank you." She studied him, not with suspicion, not with dismissal, but with evaluation, as though measuring who he had become since the night she last saw him. "You changed," she said softly. He didn't know how to respond. He nodded, trying to. A flicker of something, recognition, respect, moved through her eyes. "You didn't need to," she said. Mark shook his head. "I did." She looked down for a moment, almost uncomfortable with the idea that she had influenced someone's life so deeply. People like her rarely believed in their own impact. They served because service was their language, not because they sought transformation in others. "You're doing well," she said simply. The words hit him with more weight than any metal could. He cleared his throat. "Did you send the note?" She didn't pretend, didn't hide, didn't explain. "Yes." "Why?" he asked, voice barely steady. She answered without hesitation, "Because you needed it." He exhaled, a sound he didn't know he'd been holding inside for months. The moment stretched, quiet, fragile, real. Then a siren blared across the training field, not a drill siren. A real one. People turned, radios crackled, officers began shouting commands. Incoming medevac, real casualty, real injuries. The exercise transformed instantly into a real emergency. Soldiers rushed to positions. Medics sprinted toward the landing zone. In the chaos, she shifted seamlessly into the role she was born for. But before she moved, she looked at Mark once more. "Walk with purpose," she said. "You'll know what to do." Then she was gone, running toward the crisis, toward the noise, toward the suffering, while everyone else ran toward instructions. Mark stood frozen for a heartbeat. Then he moved. Not toward her. Toward his station. Toward the work. Toward the part he had learned to play in the silent machinery of competence. Because he understood something now. He wasn't supposed to follow her. He was supposed to follow the example she set. He coordinated supplies with a calm he didn't know he had, routed stretcher teams efficiently, made sure oxygen tanks reached the LZ without delay, tracked vitals, checked labels, double-checked inventories, all the invisible work that held the whole operation together. He didn't try to get close to her, didn't try to insert himself where he didn't belong. He played his role with quiet determination. When the helicopter touched down and dust ripped through the air, he watched her. She moved toward the injured soldier with the same steady, gentle authority she'd shown on the highway. She was the calm center of chaos again, voice clear, hands precise, presence unshakable. This time, Mark saw something new. She wasn't alone. This time other medics moved with her, young ones, Inexperienced ones, watching her closely, following her pace, listening to her commands, learning from her silence. She was teaching without announcing it. She was leading without trying. She was becoming, slowly, painfully, inevitably, what legends eventually become when they survive long enough. A mentor. After the soldier was stabilized and loaded, after the helicopter lifted into the sky with a thundering roar, after the dust began to settle again, she turned and found Mark watching. Their eyes met, and for the first time, she gave him something she rarely gave anyone. A small, honest smile. It was barely there, a flicker, a whisper. But it meant more to him than any apology he thought he needed. Then she walked away, toward her team, toward her duties, toward the endless work ahead, leaving him standing in the settling silence. But the silence felt different now. Not heavy, not punishing, not empty. It felt like possibility. He looked down at his hands, no scars, no marks, but changed nonetheless. And he finally understood. He wasn't meant to walk her path. He was meant to walk his own, with the same quiet strength she had shown him. He folded her note back into his wallet, his fingers steady. Then he returned to work. Quiet, focused, purposeful. Because he knew now that the truest kind of respect isn't something you give once. It is something you live every single day. And somewhere across the field, the ghost medic continued her mission, unaware that her presence, her scars, her silence, her strength, had rewritten not just one man's life, but the culture around her. She would never brag about it, never talk about it, never take credit. She didn't need to. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones lived without an audience. And sometimes the strongest people are the ones who speak the least. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.